Good afternoon, everybody. Very excited for another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. And I'm pleased to be joined by Matt Baran, who's the founder of Baran Architecture. And we're going to pull up his website in a bit here just to show some of the cool projects that he's been involved in. But first, Matt, thanks for joining me. I know you're traveling today and in the airport. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here. And it's a good way to pass the time while sitting in the, lounge.
It's not too early for a beer, is it? When you're traveling, and I think anything
You,
goes, right?
I was just thinking that I was walking by the bar and I was looking at everybody drinking there, and that is an airport thing. You get to drink in the airport at 9 a.m. It's
It
okay.
was, I was traveling the other day and at 6 a.m. and I saw a couple guys drinking beer at the bar. So yeah, I think anything goes. It's international
Yeah,
rules when you're in an airport bar.
maybe a little later. I'm trying to stay sharp. I have a meeting this afternoon in LA to tour a project site. And then later in the afternoon, I'm actually, of all things, meeting with Devin Lloyd Wright, which is Frank Lloyd Wright's great grandson.
No
Um,
kidding.
yeah, I met him on a camping trip in Yosemite, and we got to chatting. And his dad, who is Frank Lloyd Wright's son, built a house in the Malibu Hills, and he said, "Yeah, you should come by and see it." So I'm going to go by there this afternoon, check it out.
It's funny because I had a question I was going to ask you, and I had this teed up somewhat facetiously, but who's the greatest architect of all time, and why is it Frank Lloyd Wright?
Yeah, I think I've seen you say that before. I mean, we were doing a series on like my on favorite architects in the studio, and we were asking all the staff and who their architect was or whatever, and it's too hard. I can't do it. I'd have to have like a half dozen or something of that they sort of get blended together in my mind. But I am a child of the 80s and 90s, which was kind of a big time for deconstructivism, and that's been always in the back of my mind when I'm thinking about designing architecture for sure.
Yeah, and you being an architect, you've got a completely different lens because you would have been inspired and motivated by so many different fields and people over your career, whereas I'm just a layman who's just interested in architecture. So mine's pretty singular focused on what I've seen. So yes, I'm a big fan of Frank Lloyd Wright. So the fact that you get to meet his grandson is very cool in my mind.
Yeah, when I was putting his contact information in my phone, I was like, this is pretty great.
Yeah, no
So
kidding.
yeah, that's cool.
Wyatt, if you can you just pull up Matt's website real quick? Okay, perfect. Because there's a few things I want to talk to you about, Matt, and we'll talk about adaptive reuse, some warehouse conversions. I want to get your sense on office conversions as well, just with some of that's popular right now. People saying converting office to apartment or other uses is very popular, even though there's a lot of challenges. So I want to talk to you about the adaptive reuse process mostly, but like some of these projects you've been involved in are super cool. I'll put a link to actually, Wyatt, if you don't mind putting a link up to the website as well. You can see it on the top there. It's maybe if you throw it on in the chat. Uh, it's just very cool. As a fan of architecture, like I mentioned, I see these cool images and I nerd out over the potential and what you've been able to transform ordinary buildings into these cool things. So very cool. First of all, let's jump in right into adaptive reuse. How would you define adaptive reuse?
I mean, really broadly, and it's interesting that you ask because we've remained generalists in our work, and I think that the kind of one of the big driving factors for me has been design, and I think or a balance between design and kind of what I would say cost effectiveness and buildability maybe. And so I think we've managed to kind of run the studio that sits in this middle ground. It's not just kind of doing anything no matter what it is and how it looks and how it functions, and the sort of exclusive boutique high end stuff that you see. So we're sort of maybe a balance between those two things, and we do a broad range of projects, kind of more focused around problem solving and design than any particular program type. So adaptive reuse for us spans a pretty broad range of categories where, you know, even up to and including homes. And, we kind of categorize them on the website as remodel and addition, but in many ways that's adaptive reuse as well, which is really interesting because even right now you're seeing a lot of homeowners that don't want to move. They don't want to give up their 3% interest rates. And so they're doing a lot of expansion and addition and remodeling to their homes. So, you're kind of repurposing what they have and making it fit what they need. I think that extends all the way out to any program type conversion to any other program type. So, we've done a lot of, we've taken old warehouses and armory and converted it to residential units. We've converted to, the same kind of thing to live work. We're doing a shopping mall that's being converted into science and technology right now. We've converted warehouses into offices and labs for science and tech. So it runs a pretty wide range of kind of commercial use, including commercial residential multi-unit. So, we're a bit all over the place and kind of always up for the analytical challenge of what it takes to convert from one thing to another.
So you've 25 years of experience. What's your background on what got you into architecture in the first place?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, do you want the sort of messed up psychological answer or the sort of
I'll take
surface?
anything. I'll take anything.
So, I think that I was always let's see, someone's going to Austin. So one thing was I was an artist, a quote unquote artist as a kid. I think that I was always drawing and painting, and I got into printmaking, and that was always just an interest. That's a piece of it, and one of the things that I would put, simply put, it's it's an art form that pays money. I mean, architecture is generally not great money, as most people know, but it is, a nice blend of art, science, practicality, a steady paycheck. If you run your own practice, you can actually make, pretty good money. And then you can also extend your skills to do other things. I think we talked about, development deals. I've done a few. I'm looking at one right now as well. So, that adds to that. But, going back to the sort of reasons why, I mean, it certainly wasn't the money. There was the art. There was my dad telling me to get a job, but I think the other piece of it was, I grew up in a pretty unstable environment. And I think that there was sort of a drive in some ways to control that environment. And, I guess maybe in a bit of a contradiction, which is fine. I'm full of those. On the other end of it, there was a certain flexibility that those unstable environments forced me to adapt to. And so a lot of the architecture that I do isn't actually about controlling environments. It's maybe controlling environments within a framework. Mm-hmm. So, it provides for adaptability and flexibility within, the project itself, which is, I think, probably why we're pretty good at adaptive reuse, because we can see the sort of multiple angles and the multiple ways you might be able to use something and have a dialogue with that existing building and make it into something that is useful for its new function or program.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I walk through empty buildings quite often, and it's hard for a lot of people to conceptualize what it would look like if it was built out. So maybe that's an empty warehouse where they have to add some office, and they just can't visualize what it would look like adding 2,000 square feet of office and where everything would go. It's very hard for most people to do it. And you're at the complete other end of that, where you not only have to visualize what it would look like, you have to do all the planning and visualizing on it. So it's far more intense than what most people are familiar with. When someone approaches you with doing an adaptive reuse project, what is the first step? Do they already have an idea in mind? Like, will it be converting a warehouse and perhaps in a downtown core into something else? Or where do you get involved, and what does that look like?
I mean, I think it depends on the experience and the developer, the level of experience and the developer's personality themselves, and how kind of under the hood they like to get. I mean, I was at an event last night about finance, commercial real estate finance, and the office, as we all know, is pretty dead, and so they had set up the space, and there's this kind of synergy between the event and trying to market the space, and they had boards up in the space to kind of show how it could be converted. So they had plans and they had some renderings. Maybe we usually do renderings, and it helps people kind of visualize what the space is like. And a lot of times, developers will come to me. They may or may not want to spend the money on spec as they move forward. So they ask us to do a marketing package for them, and
you are subject to cancellation.
The marketing package usually includes something to help somebody visualize the space.
It's currently putting at gate 10. We need chicken confirmed passengers to please make your way to gate 10 for an on-time departure.
Is that your flight?
Not yet. Not yet. Sorry about that. So yeah, but visualizing the space, and a lot of times they'll say, okay, we don't know who we want here. We know we want something generally like a lab or technology tenant. And so they'll come in and say, this is broadly what we want. We'll take our experience with those types of tenants, lay something out, render it, show it, walk people through the space, show them the rendering so that they can see what the potential is. And then when they land a specific client that has specific needs, we'll start tweaking the design to change it to something that might better suit that particular tenant. So it's usually they have a rough idea of what they want. They look to us for our experience and what that means. I mean, if there's a tenant that's already ready to go, we'll just kind of jump in and work with them in their specific program. But sometimes it's all the way as early in the process, all the way back to where an owner is just looking for a site and they're trying to figure out, what's a kind of investment thesis and what can we look for to populate. I mean, on a smaller scale, and some of the development that I do, what we had done in the last cycle in around 2010 was found a bunch of lots that could support multiple units and the sort of existing ownership and it wasn't evident. And so it was a good investment thesis to say we could buy this existing unit and we can add multiple units to it. And we did. We went through an investor's portfolio that had no idea what he was sitting on, but it was a veritable gold mine where, we just went through all of his portfolio. So we can do a unit here, we can do a unit here, we can do a unit here. And it was all just gravy for him because he was cash flowing all these units all over the Bay Area. And we just made him a bunch of money building additional units on all those properties.
So I completely see how a developer would want to limit their costs at the beginning and just get as something that perhaps as basic as a rendering on that. But at what point do you need to look under the hood a little bit more and determine if it's actually feasible? And by that, I mean from like a zoning perspective or just any impediments with the building.
No, that includes all of that. So like those first steps, I think what we would do what you would call a test fit. And that would include checking zoning and, in fact, building codes. I mean, hazardous, material requirements become a big deal. Exiting becomes a big deal when refitting something. And, we were talking about Class A, office to residential and why no one's doing it. I mean, those deep floor plates don't really work, but we've done smaller kind of Class C office buildings to residential or warehouses to residential, and that tends to work a lot better because you do have to look at zoning codes, building codes, and just constructability. Where's the plumbing going to run? Those are just kind of practical considerations. How much light do you need, which is a building code issue, but are you going to get enough light penetrating deep enough into the space? I mean, a lot of people have talked about those bigger floor plates, a bedroom that doesn't need a window. That's kind of the debate, right? Do bedrooms need windows? You sleep in them. From a fire standpoint, at a certain type of construction, you don't need them anymore. So there are a lot of those types of considerations to decide whether it's a fit, in the first place. So they'll come to us early, and before we would even start a rendering, we'd have to look at those things, because I don't want to go down a path that's not going to be feasible for somebody, and they spend a bunch of money on me, and that's bad for everyone.
One that's become common in the industrial space over the past 5 years is taking old shopping centers, which perhaps they lost their anchor tenant, or they're no longer desirable, and trying to convert those into last mile distribution centers. And
Yeah.
notwithstanding the fact that there's zoning issues and building code issues and other things that you have to work around, one of the major issues is community pushback, because these malls are probably going to be located in residential areas, which makes it attractive from that last mile delivery. But these people in these communities don't want to necessarily have 24-hour truck traffic and the noise and everything that comes with having a distribution center versus a pedestrian focused mall. At what point do you have to account for the community roadblocking any type of conversion or adaptive reuse?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. I think that like with most answers, it's sort of it depends. I think that, housing even, because you give a really good example. I mean, truck traffic and all that kind of thing. We deal with that a lot in West Oakland over there. And I know, it's a big issue. Even with housing, people, any kind of change is going to trigger something. That's where people's minds go, so they tend to think, okay, if there's going to be more housing, there's going to be more cars, there's going to be more people, there's going to be more congestion, there's going to be more conflict, or other issues that come up. It's gentrification. You're building housing for tech people, not local residents, all that kind of thing. So I think that it's always good on a big enough project to do outreach into the community. Every community is different. A lot of the projects that we do in some of the tougher parts of Oakland, people are just happy to see us come in and do something to kind of fix up an old house that's dilapidated or was, a drug den or something. And, even with some of the multi stuff, a lot of those buildings are abandoned. We've had projects where they were you probably have heard of Ghost Ship, the big fire some years ago in Oakland, where, a dozen people died because they were living illegally in a warehouse and it caught fire during an event or something. And, so we have people that have lived in some of those buildings, and it's hazardous because you're not supposed to be living in those spaces. I mean, the spaces have been abandoned for a certain amount of time to begin with. So they really need to be upgraded no matter what. Once the use changes and a building empty that long, it starts to become hazardous and it's outdated. And then if you're changing the use, that's another layer of hazard. And so, in fact, one of the adaptive reuse buildings we did not too long ago was exactly that, where 2 people died in a fire in that building. Mm-hmm. And so we came in, repaired the damage, brought it up to code, converted it into housing, made it safe. And now it's,
This is Congress announcement basically for all passengers.
Viable living place.
Is most of your work in California, or are you, because I know you have 2 offices, do you do work outside of California as well?
It is mostly, I would say all California. It's not totally true. We're licensed, or I'm licensed in Nevada, Michigan, Washington, and we do modular projects in those places. So, we do a lot of modular design or module design. We work with another outfit that does stuff all over the country. Most of our work, though, is in the Bay Area and the Los Angeles area. We're kind of looking at other places, Las Vegas, Detroit. We have some connections there. So we may be doing some work there in the future.
Cool. I want to touch on the office side a bit, because I think even though it's not related to industrial real estate, I think this is still a very fascinating and topical issue to address, is this glut of office space. And I'm sure in San Francisco it's prevalent, and it's certainly common in most major markets where there's the huge increase in vacancy and concern about what to do with all this product. What when you hear somebody say, well, let's just convert this office into residential, and it makes sense so intuitively that it sounds so simple. We have too much office and we don't have enough housing, so just convert office into housing, and it's wham bam, it's all done. What's your conversation to people when they try to uh, take it down to such a basic level as that, on just how easy it should be to convert?
I mean, this is a question that you can answer for like a lot of things, and I think that there is the sort of why not just convert office into housing? There's also the why not just convert shipping containers into buildings? Why not convert? Now we're seeing a bunch of empty, science and tech lab spaces. Why not convert those, right? And I think that some of it is, purely functional. We talk about depth of floor plate and getting light into the space and kind of, is it going to be a quality space in the first place? But I think there are other considerations that are somewhat invisible that require thought. That is,
we're currently in our general order for Southwest Airlines flight number 67617 to Denver. Please proceed to
infrastructure. So
thank you for flying Southwest Airlines.
Infrastructure, things like toilets, power, and not just, you've got to now core through structural slabs. Maybe they're post-tension structural slabs, and you've got to plumb, and you need to get that plumbing into the ceilings, and then you need to think about the load on the sewer system and the load being drawn from the power system. And so I think a lot of the infrastructure questions, and it is the same from office to a shipping container. People say, well, why not just do a shipping container and make it into a unit? And it's the toilet doesn't fit 18 inches off the wall where it needs to be for ADA access because there's a piece of framing right there. It's like trying to retrofit any existing building. It's not necessarily cooperating with you. So there are all kinds of things that you're going to run into that you're going to have to work around that are going to cost more than if you say built it from the ground up. So you essentially, in many of these cases, what you have is a skin. And then you kind of have to ask yourself, what's the value of that skin that you're getting? Because all the internal elements still need to be built. And so like with a lot of these office projects, it seems that from a numbers standpoint, and you can find different studies, Gensler did a big one not too long ago, and everybody's going to argue the finer points, but even with a zero basis, you're not going to have a project that is viable because the amount of money needs to be invested.
When you're talking to developers or owners or just people in general that are in this space, what are your thoughts on what happens to the office market in the upcoming future? And that could be next year, that could be the next 10 years. What's your thoughts on that?
The event that I was at yesterday, the consensus seemed to be waited out. I think that maybe that's oversimplifying the answer as well here, but I think that they were talking about retail and how during COVID retail had died, and there's a bunch of lenders up there, big commercial lenders, and they're like, some X percentage of our loans last year were malls and retail, and it's come roaring back, and I kind of assume that's nationally. I don't know that I see that myself, in the Bay or in LA, but they seem to think that, it's just a matter of time and it's coming back. So, I think that you will see some conversion stuff. I mean, and it's really interesting, right? Because you see the kind of politics of it, and you see people opening up zoning, and they say, okay, now you can convert these offices to residential, and there are a lot of people now out there clamoring about red tape and how much cheaper it would be if we could move projects through. But these are not the only barriers to getting housing built. I mean, a lot of people would suggest that, it's what makes housing more expensive. It's why it's not getting built, because it takes so long to get it done. And yes, that is part of it. But, 7-8% interest rates aren't helping the situation at all either. And rents being, 3 months of concessions being handed out everywhere that aren't helping either. the eviction moratoriums, and the fear of some weird regulation being thrown out, changing the dates on rent control or whatever it might be. All that stuff is contributing. So, the environment, I think what I've seen and heard is that the environment is just going to change again, and you kind of wait for the environment to change. But, I think that there's always a project out there that's ripe for conversion. It just depends on so many factors, even like microclimates in the market, the geography.
So you mentioned that a lot of developers will want to do that test fit before they commit to actually going ahead with the project. What's the time involved? And I'm sure the answer on this is it depends as well. But even just if you give me like a range or a ballpark, just because I think a lot of people would say, I have a project that's ripe for redevelopment or adaptive reuse, but they perhaps underestimate the time that'd be involved to go through that process. So even just, do you have a ballpark idea that you'd say to someone?
Yeah. I mean, the depends answer is kind of like, it depends. And here are several different kind of scenarios, right? And so, if timeframes, they come to us, I mean, as far as test fits, I mean, we can, depending on the level of resolution they're looking for, we can do something in a few days. We can do a yield study on something in a few days. It's going to be with a real, not very sharp pencil. And so, anywhere from, a couple days to a couple of weeks to kind of get people a good sense of what they can do. And then maybe a few weeks from there to get to something that, is even almost actionable, with renderings and a more realistic idea of what it is. And, the construction cost is always kind of the issue, right? So you cannot get a good accurate bid from a test fit. You can get order of magnitude numbers, sort of wild ass guess numbers from a sketch. But the more information you put into that, I mean, this is the problem with almost every project across the board, right? I mean, the more information you put in, the more you can find out about what your project's going to cost and what it's going to look like, and the closer you get to having answers. But you can't have those answers in the first 2 weeks with a very small investment. And the tough thing is, the answer might be, this is not a deal. I think that is the issue. I mean, right now on smaller stuff that I'm doing myself, I find this property, I'm like, wow, that price is insane. I think we should buy it. And I'm trying to put together a really fast site plan to see, can we actually fit these units? Does it make sense from the zoning standpoint? Will they let us do it? What are the impacts to the sale side? What are the comps? But what is the construction cost is a really big one, and people say, oh, $400 a foot or whatever, $500 a foot, or if it's a bigger project, it's $2. But you just don't know until you have solid drawings and you can actually get real bids from real subs. You can speculate. That's about it.
So how do you navigate that?
Just keep guessing, I mean, I think that, okay, so on the sort of brighter side of it, right? Those numbers, everybody's like, well, they're useless. But on the other hand, they're useful from the standpoint of, if that's what we're seeing in the market, and we've completed a few projects and we know what they're coming in at per square foot, and we can kind of lean on that a bit, add a little because it's, times have changed, or keep it flat because there is no new work out there. So we can get a really rough guess, and and I don't think that I would advise anyone do a project, and if their margins are, not fat enough to accommodate those micro fluctuations in market price on construction, right? So I'm like, if my unrealistic margin is 50%, maybe realistically I hit 30 or 25 or something, and that's, if I'm beating the stock market, then I guess it's like a go.
Versus doing a pro forma at 25%, and then it comes in that you wipe out all that spread and you just don't get all that work for nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have some contingency in there, but like, yeah, if your 50% might be a little crazy, like it's the, and you're always running through the pro formas, right? It's like I've got my rosy, the best day ever pro forma, lowest cost, highest yield, and I've got my, oh shit, total disaster pro forma. And if, that one is still making $1, then okay, I guess I will have wasted my time, but hopefully it'll go towards the home run. I guess.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. What are the main challenges you see developers make early on? Is there commonalities that projects that fail, or developers that aren't happy with the process or aren't happy with the outcome? Are there certain things that you see developers do that they should have done?
Yeah, I mean, you plugged the website earlier, and thanks for that. I will also say that on the website there's a resources page, and I wrote this little, I don't know what you want to call it, handbook or guide. That's the developer's guide or something like that. I can't remember what we titled it, but it's essentially every mistake that I've seen developers make, and I've kind of wrote down anecdotally things that I've seen either once or multiple times. And I think that, developers that lack experience don't, I think, basically, in a nutshell, sort of broadly, don't understand scope. And so, you need to as a developer, you have to understand the entire process, and you have to know all of the scope that's going into it and make sure that it's either being handled by someone or you're handling it yourself. And I see a lot of scope fall through the cracks because, they're like trying to sort of stepping over dollars to pick up pennies kind of stuff. It's like they don't want to pay the architect or the engineer or, the surveyor or whoever to do a certain thing. They're going to do it themselves, and then they can't get it done. So, scope like doing the PG&E applications really, really early. And you can't do them too early because they won't talk to you unless you have, a permit or something submitted for permit at least. And so you can't do it too early, and then you can't wait too long, because I see it time and again, people, smaller developers getting a project done and being like, okay, we're going to move in, we're going to move in tenants, or we're going to sell it or whatever. And it's like, you don't have power. And then they call me and they say, why didn't you do the application for PG&E? And I'm like, man, that's outside our scope. I try to tell every developer when I start a project, hey, who's got PG&E? Because, or, in any PG&E or, Department of Water and Power, whoever it is, whatever locality, right? Because those things are inevitably backed up. And so, it's things like power, water, power, sewer, meters, anything that's to do with like government regulatory stuff, green building checklists, always fall through the cracks. And then they come at the end and they're like, well, where's your green building checklist? And it's in the past been on an audit, and now it's kind of becoming more common. So, it's becoming more of a problem. Finalizing maps, complications around property lines and final maps and recording property and recording maps. Those are a few that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, these days, missing the market. I've seen people that were expecting $1.2 million on the sale side, and they're now looking at 900. And now you're back to that make $1 kind of thing. So they're renting stuff up or whatever it might be. Conditions of approval. That's when I was tweeting about the other day, not reading the COAs, buying a property with an entitlement and not reading the COAs. That's a huge one. Because a lot of it is boilerplate, but once in a while there's other stuff in there. The one that I was talking about, you needed to move an existing house before you could get permits for any of the other work to start. So we ended up redesigning that to work around the existing house. Stuff like that. Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything else, but you can download that thing.
And I'll look for it. I didn't see that when I was on your website last, but we'll put a link to that in there because I think that'd be very helpful for people to see mistakes that you've seen other people make, and then they can try to avoid it themselves. So yeah, I think that's very fascinating. And kind of that's saying you don't know what you don't know. If you're a developer and you don't even know some of these things that are potential issues, like getting power, gas, and water in there, and utilities, if you don't even know about the timelines on that, then by the time you find out, it's too late. So yeah, I think that'll be a very helpful resource. I'll put that in there.
And I think a lot of starting developers really need to make sure that they, pay for somebody in full scope, because we'll do a builder set, we'll do a basic permit package for longtime clients that we've done 100 projects with, and I know that they don't need a full set and they're not going to get it bid out. They have their, crew they work with, and that's all, fine. But you have somebody that comes to us that hasn't done it before, and they're like, well, we just want the cheapest possible package. And it's like, hey, I don't think that's a good idea, but okay, if that's what you want. I mean, I'm not going to work for free. So, on the architecture side, maybe on the developer side, but if that's what you want, we'll do it for you. And then we do. And, we had a guy that was like, no CA. I don't need any CA. It was his first construction project, and he didn't have foundations shot. He was just, out there doing it. And we built the whole thing, and we never came out for CA, and they were trying to wrap things up and get occupancy. And they said, well, did you ever have this shot? And he's like, what are you talking about? No, I don't know what that is. So they shot the building, and he was 6 inches over the property line, the whole building. So he went to the neighbor, and he said, can we buy this 6 inches of property? And the guy was like, yeah, $2 million. And it was like, okay. So the project went into receivership. I mean, the bank took it. I don't even know how it all went down, but it was not pretty. I know that. Not getting an environmental assessment. I saw that one the other day. Actually now this project is just on the market again, and I don't know how they've got it on the market, but they had a phase one. It was like cheap environmental engineer, didn't catch anything, was like, yeah, it's fine. Did the whole project. Buyer came in, wanted a phase one, and dry cleaning plume shows up. Now same thing, can't sell the project. Nobody wants it. So yeah, development is a kind of a construction development. There's so many surprises, and it almost never even matters how much experience you have. You think you've seen it all. Prepare yourself. There's something out there that you haven't seen before, right? And so that's what the contingency budget's for. I mean, you got to have it. You got to expect it. And you in some ways it's like Vegas. You're just rolling dice, especially on that adaptive reuse stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's not lost on me after hearing you talk about this more, is that it's almost like going out to sea, and you don't know if you're going to have choppy waters. You don't know if it's going to be nice. You don't know what's around the corner, but you'd better hope that you have a captain or some help on the ship, because if you're going out by yourself and you encounter a storm, that's going to be pretty ugly.
Yeah, more buoyancy than you need or something, I mean, yeah, that's the issue.
One other thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on, and I know you're boarding here pretty quickly, so I'll just, if anybody does have a question for Matt, please put it in the chat. But I wanted to ask you, in California, there's a lot of warehouse moratoriums right now, especially in the Orange County area, where they're trying to restrict any new warehouse building whatsoever, or at least try to push it down the line. What are you seeing in the industrial space in California in general? Is that there's still a healthy demand, but it seems that we're getting all these bottleneck supply issues now. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't have direct exposure to that. I think that, it's funny because at that event that I was at last night, we do have one client that's been around for a while. And, I was wondering, because after COVID, it seemed like, okay, maybe industrial is, not what it once was. And these guys, they're pure industrial. Their name's Berkeley Partners. I used to work with the guy at a company called Dogtown Development. He's now at Berkeley Partners, and they're doing industrial, I think California, but also nationwide. And, they're looking at big sites. We're analyzing a 20-acre site for them right now in man, I can't remember where it was. We were looking at one in Richmond, kind of outlying outer Bay Area ring. So, as far as the industrial stuff goes, I see people out there, they still seem to be pursuing it pretty aggressively, maybe more creatively now. Like, they're also, because they have housing experience, they're looking at deals where there might be a housing component either included in the sale or is a requirement because part of it's zoned a certain way or whatever it might be. But yeah, as far as the moratoriums go, I have not encountered it, so I don't totally know. But now that you mention it, I will look into it. Kind of curious.
Yeah, most of them are in Orange County, but there's even other cities that are doing it. There's Deerfield outside of Chicago. They've got a warehouse moratorium. There's a couple markets in New York that are doing it, and I think it's a function that, going back to converting a shopping center into a warehouse, a lot of these industrial areas have started encroaching closer and closer to residential areas.
Right.
So if you have that traditional industrial park that's tucked away outside of the public purview and nobody's looking at it, nobody sees it, it's
Yeah,
not as
fair.
big of an issue as opposed to a million square foot warehouse being developed on the other side of the street from you. And that's just the nature of industrial development. It's just grown so much that it's now becoming a lot more public.
Yeah, I mean, I will be in. I have family and friends in Orange County, and I'll be there this weekend after the LA trip, and I'm kind of curious. But I know, there's Newport Beach, gated communities, like those folks are not going to be down with the warehouse stuff. If you're in Oakland, neighborhoods, they're less involved, they're less aware, which I mean, is its own problem. It's kind of why you see some of the sort of zoning issues and demographic issues you see, is that certain people are involved and have the time and the wherewithal, and certain people don't. Because even with, any program type has an appropriate time and place, but like West Oakland has problems, it's the port is right there, and you've got, high incidence of asthma and children and things around there. I mean, you've got to be careful in how you zone those things. You can't build anything anywhere, that's for sure.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Unless you're in Houston, then you can. Then you can literally build anything anywhere. My favorite story with Houston is that, and I don't know if you've heard this one or not, but there is an amusement park right on one of the boardwalks, and there's a residential area, call it like half a block down the street. The amusement park wanted to build a roller coaster, and because you didn't need to apply for a permit or development permit or anything, they just built a roller coaster right in this person's backyard. Like it'd be 30 feet from the person's backyard, a wooden roller coaster that's running nonstop every day, and they didn't even need a permit to build it.
It's crazy. I mean, yeah, it's one thing if you move in behind the train tracks and you know what you're getting yourself into, like somebody building a roller coaster in your backyard. Yeah, it's pretty Kafkaesque. I mean, we laugh. It's really unfortunate for that person, but I mean, I guess that like on that front, zoning controls. I mean, I rail against this stuff, and I think that on some level, you know, um, design review is out of control, and it's slowing down the production of housing. And I don't want my neighbor deciding what my house looks like or if it's painted blue. I mean, I think that's all, BS. But if it's a health or environmental issue, then it should be regulated. I mean, if you don't want somebody building a factory next to your, family home or whatever. I get that. But like what the pitch of the roof is, or if the window has an arch or not, like that's just nonsense. Can't take it.
That's got to be the pet peeve in your industry.
I mean, that for me, for sure, especially because, we're in Bay Area is pretty conservative in terms of architecture. I mean, everybody thinks it's this very liberal place, but when it comes to, thinking a certain way, it's as closed-minded as anywhere, maybe more so. And especially with the architecture, I mean, in LA, people are much more open-minded, and, the arts and architecture are far more progressive in LA than they are in the Bay Area. And so because we have a kind of specialized design, I wouldn't just got into this discussion the other day, and I wouldn't necessarily call it modernism because we incorporate a lot of the elements that people appreciate about traditional architecture into our modern architecture. Complexity of form, detail, warm colors and materials like wood, and so, but it isn't traditional in the sort of most classical sense of that term. And so we get a lot of pushback on projects from the city, from neighbors. And so, it's amazing to me that we're still challenged by that. You wouldn't see it generally in LA, but you definitely still see it very heavily in the Bay. And it drives me crazy.
I bet. Yeah, no, it's I could see how that would drive you crazy. I know you've got to be getting on a flight here real quick, so I'll end it with that, just so you're not too rushed for it. But I'll put a link to Baran Architecture's website. I'll pull up that article that you wrote, because I think I'm very interested in reading that myself. You're also active on Twitter. You and I go back and forth sometimes on some things. Where else could I direct people to connect with you if they want to reach out more?
So, all the socials, the Twitter one is kind of the most balanced. It's about development, it's about design, it's about construction, it's about my dog, or whatever. I just have fun there. So we're also, I have a LinkedIn profile, of course. I have an Instagram profile, which is mostly me doing weird stuff with AI. Baran Studio itself has social media presence across the board as well. So website and all social media, mostly if you search for Matt Baran, you'll find me, or Baran Studio Architecture, you'll find the company on social. So that's probably about it. Yeah, and that resource page, by the way, has that developer guide, but it's got a bunch of other stuff on there too. So it's got a ADU guide, it's got some other modular stuff. So there's some good resources on the site as well. Density guide.
Very cool. I look forward to checking it out myself. So I'll put links to as much as I can in the show notes, so people can go and check it out more. But I'd encourage people to reach out and connect with you on Twitter, because it's you put out some great posts and very informative, and I like some of the AI ones that you put out as well. I think those are great too. So
I try not to get too crazy there.
Well, I
try to get
crazier.
people.
Crazier. Twitter seems to be getting crazier anyway, so we might as well just roll with the flow.
I always enjoy it. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of my favorite places right now too. So, well, Matt, thanks so much. I know you're got a flight to catch, but I really do appreciate this, and look forward to keeping in touch with you.